To another edition of Off to Tube. As I'm sure you figured out from my post already, I will not be in class today. I have to take Avery to a doctor's appointment, and so since I live in Solvang and the doctor's in Santa Barbara, it's just going to take a little bit longer than a normal doctor's appointment would. But I figured I would get you all set up so that even in my absence, you could continue on with your learning. So just to contextualize your day, we're continuing to study and look further into the modern era, this time period from 1750 to 1914. And while it seems like a pretty short amount of time, there are going to be incredible amounts of things that are going to shift and change. The theme of the modern era is modernity, so mod, so hip, so chic, on fleek. The modern era, ladies and gentlemen, that will be defined by Europe, as Europe is going to, because of the changes that happen in its society, have another golden age. It is Europe that is going to be on top of the world politically, economically, and according to them at least, socially as well. And so Europe is going to define modernity in two ways. The first definition of a modern society is going to be one that implements Enlightenment values, one that implements the ideas of equality, of individual liberty, this idea that humans have rights. Well, okay, when I say humans, I mean, according to the Enlightenment, men have rights. Sorry, ladies, you won't get rights until the 20th century. But this idea that all men, at the very least, are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights like life, liberty, and property. And we're going to see these Enlightenment ideals apparently being implemented by our major Atlantic revolutions, the revolutions that occur in what is now known as the United States, in France, in Haiti, in Latin America. Each of these places are going to try and tear down the political order of their respective places and then try to rebuild their society from the ground up, utilizing Enlightenment values. The second definition of a modern society is one that is industrialized, one whose economy moves away from agriculture being the major means of earning a living, to instead mass producing goods using machines that you can then sell those goods on a global market and earn a great profit. And Europe is going to go through massive industrial changes that is going to dramatically shift its society. Well, what we started talking about yesterday are these Atlantic revolutions. And really, our question was okay, if chapter 17 talks about these revolutions, these political revolutions, these violent popular uprisings that were supposed to tear down society as it was and rebuild it from the ground up, to what extent do they actually do that? To what extent do Atlantic revolutions really create the change that we're going to see in Europe and really any place that is impacted by Europe? And we looked at France yesterday, and our conclusion was, yeah, you know what? The French Revolution really didn't do all that much. While it sets the groundwork and is going to have some long term implications, the French Revolution really fails at dramatically changing France. France starts out as an absolutist monarch, it starts out as a strict social hierarchy that doesn't have any social mobility, and it then stays that exact way after the revolution is over. It goes back to those very things it was trying to change. Period two, we looked at Haiti yesterday, and we looked at, well, Haiti actually is an example of things really dramatically changing, despite the fact that, unfortunately, the lives of slaves really didn't improve as much, at least economically. What you're going to be doing today in your first assignment in my absence, what should take you honestly no more than about 15 minutes, is you're going to be completing this assignment on Neo. Atlantic revolutions, how much did they change society? And you're going to go back to your chapter 17 notes. You're going to maybe go back to chapter 17, or perhaps maybe you just want to use Google, whatever it is that helps you best. And I want you to continue doing what we started doing yesterday. What we started doing yesterday is we looked at some pieces of evidence from after the revolutions. And we wanted to look up those evidence, figure out what those evidence pieces were, and then explain how either they show that those revolutions produced the Enlightenment changes that they set out to do? Or do we really see just a continuity occurring from life before the revolution to after? And so today, you're going to be looking at Latin America in particular. And you're going to be looking at pieces of evidence explaining how they represent either a change or a continuity to life in Latin America before those revolutions for independence, particularly life in Latin America under Spanish rule and under the Casta system. Do we see Latin America truly becoming a place where the common people have power politically, economically, and socially? Or is it a place that really largely stays the same? It still has a stratified hierarchy, still has an unfair political system. How is it that we see the Latin American revolutions impacting Latin American society? So you're going to be looking at the evidence of Simon Bolivar and Jose de San Martin. Who are those individuals, and do they represent a change? Simon Bolivar is going to have this idea of La Gran Colombia, which may or may not actually happen and might show you whether or not there truly is this change in society. And then you're looking at the evidence really in the end of Latin America's political instability, as you see Latin America kind of going into a bunch of civil wars, as warlords or caudillos, individual generals, are going to be fighting each other over power, over who has power in the various states of Latin America. So you're going to be looking at those pieces of evidence and explaining, do they represent a change? Do they represent a continuity? Do we see an enlightened society actually happening in Latin America? Or does Latin America largely stay the same despite them throwing off throwing off their Spanish overlords? So once you finish up writing your evidence, you're then going to do an analysis statement. After you look at your evidence, I want to know, well, why do they mostly change? Or if you argue they mostly stay the same, well, yeah, why are they mostly staying the same? What is it that is causing these two places to mostly stay the same? So if you look at my Haiti example here, I go on and I explain why we see this thing mostly staying the same, despite failing. When we looked at Haiti, we looked at slavery was abolished. That gave former slaves social equality. They were given social equality to everybody else in Haiti. We see Haiti becoming the first ever black republic. This demonstrates how former slaves are now given political power. They're given popular sovereignty. They have an input and a say in how they are governed. Then we looked at the redistribution of former plantation land into small plots for farmers. These slaves were then given economic power and economic opportunity that they didn't have before to earn a living and to support themselves and their families. However, that redistribution also caused Haiti to lose its influence in the global sugar market, which meant that these farmers didn't have people outside of Haiti to sell their goods to. And therefore, you see most of these farmers continuing to live in poverty. So my analysis was, despite the failing to bring economic prosperity to former slaves, the Haitian Revolution represents a major change because of the social and political power granted to the previously oppressed population. Slaves were previously under the control of white slave owners and politically controlled by the French. The Haitian Revolution capitalized on the instability within France and declared and maintained independence and flipped their society completely and allowed slaves to live in a society where they were equal to their neighbor and were able to have a say in their system of government. I explain why this is a major change. Why is this a mostly change? So that's what you're going to do with Latin America. After you go through the evidence pieces, after you explain how those evidence pieces show a change or a continuity, you're then going to look at your evidence and say, do I think it mostly changes, or do I think it mostly stays the same, and why? So that's the first part of your day, and that should take you, again, no more than, I would say, 15 to 20 minutes maximum. The sub is already going to have put you in breakout rooms. I encourage you guys to work on these together. Please, if you do work on these together, do not have the same exact answers. Your answers should vary. You should be working together. You can have similar ideas, but you shouldn't be saying the exact same things. I don't accept copying, but I do accept collaboration. So the second thing that you are then going to do with your group is you're going to begin to research what really does bring about modernity in Europe. What really do we see making the changes that the Atlantic revolutions failed to do? Right? What really is going to lead to Europe becoming a dominant power? What really do we see causing actually Enlightenment values to be implemented? What is it that brings about the actual change? And that's going to be industrialization. So you and your group are going to be researching various aspects of those changes that occurred with industrialization. Now, you've already done that research in your notes for chapter 18 in Strayer. I'm going to give you another set of reading that will give you kind of a fresh perspective on some of the things that you already know, and will help to add on and hopefully help to clarify in some cases. But before we begin kind of going through the directions, I want to look at Europe before, right? As we look at industrialization causing changes and really bringing about European modernity, right? What was life like before in Europe? And so I wanted to talk about the pre-industrialization labor systems of Europe. How was Europe economically structured during the post-classical and early modern eras? Well, a majority of Europe was based on agriculture. We talked about it in the early modern era as Europe is now engaging more in global trade, as merchants are rising in power and in status and in economic wealth. But the majority of Europe is still heavily based on agriculture. And that system has been in place since the post-classical era. That system is known as manorialism, as you have a wealthy noble who owns a large plot of land, a whole region. And on that region is going to live peasants who are renting the land from the Lord and who sometimes work common land. Anything that they grow on the noble's land is technically the property of the owner. Anything done on common land can be then grown for the peasant's family, and then if there's any left over, could then be sold in a market. But you see, peasants are again tied to the land. Peasants are working this land while the noble is reaping all of the benefits. But it really shows why the nobility was able to have such incredible influence. It's their land that gives them power and wealth. And peasants are forced to just do what they can with what their lord gives them. Well, by the time of the early modern era, you do see a growth in cities. You see a growth in trade and merchant activity, as of course as Quinn and Brian will tell you. This is the rise of the bourgeoisie within cities. And you see merchants in cities actually realizing that they could get some of their product cheaper if they hire peasant women to make things for them, especially cloth. And this is what develops what's called the cottage system, where women would own these looms, just like what Sleeping Beauty pricked her finger on. They would own these looms, and they would spin cloth one by one, piece by piece. And they would then make the cloth, and a merchant would say, I'll give you this amount of money for every piece of cloth that you do. Women had the ability to A, name their hours, B, work as much as they want. If they feel like they really need some money, they could work all night, they could do whatever they need to do, or they could take a week off if they wanted to. Essentially what the cottage system is what's called moonlighting, or doing a second job to have more income if you want. Still, a majority of their income was coming from farming, and especially farming on land technically owned by the Lord. However, especially women were able to earn a little extra income by producing things for merchants. And merchants were happy to do this because these women were way cheaper than the gilded labor that was within the cities. And speaking of guilds, within these cities, while much of Europe was agricultural, there were cities that held a lot of skilled craftsmen and artisans. Within that group were guilds. What guilds were essentially organizations for a specific skilled work. There would be a carpenter's or a builder's guild. There would be a cloth merchant guild. There'd be guilds for whatever industry somebody was a part of. And these guilds would meet together and they would regulate labor conditions, they would regulate pay, and they would also do quality control. They would not allow somebody to be a part of the guild if they did not prove that they were skilled enough in whatever it is that they were producing. And so these are just labor systems before industrialization. This is before Europe goes through these dramatic changes that you are reading about. Because when we see Europe changing into becoming industrialization, they're really going from farming as the majority of this, as the system of the economic system that the majority of Europeans are following, to really a complete shift where the majority of their economy is now going to be the mass production of goods using machines in factories that are then going to be sold on a global market. Other than the agricultural revolution, this is going to be the biggest shift for the world. And so you're going to be looking at then you're going to be looking at what were those changes? What were those shifts? So you and your group are going to be completing this assignment on a shared slide deck. So if you click on that link in the assignment, it will take you to your share slide deck. You can see I started here with the changes, which is a David Bowie reference, which is why I have the picture, and whatever. I have the directions here on slide 2. You're going to take turns reading through your assigned section. So depending on what breakout room you are in, if you're in breakout room 1, you're going to read the section on fruits of industry. If you're breakout room 3, urbanization and migration. If you're breakout room 5, industrial society, and so on and so forth. So you're going to look at what section your breakout room has been assigned. By the way, just as a heads up, since you're going to be in groups of 4, there are only odd number breakout rooms because breakout room 1 and 2 are all part of breakout room 1, so you're a group of 4 instead of just a partnership. That's why there's only odd numbers. But you're going to work through clicking on this link, reading the assigned section. You're going to take turns reading. I want you to read out loud to each other. Again, you are looking at it, you are hearing it, and you can discuss it. Those are 3 ways that you can then get the information. So the expectation is you're taking turns reading through your assigned section. I want you to highlight evidence of the changes industrialization brought to Europe. What evidence do you see of things changing from that manorialism, from those guilds, from the cottage system? What is it that is shifting? After you've read and you've highlighted evidence, I want you to label and describe at least 2 changes and at least 1 continuity found in your section on your assigned slide. So you're going to look back at your evidence and you're going to say, okay, what does this evidence show actually changed? Give me 2 changes, and then, okay, well, this changes, but what maybe stays the same? What hasn't really shifted all that much? So find 2 changes and 1 continuity. You're then going to use Google to search for 2 images of evidence that prove your changes and your continuity, and you're going to put them on your slide. Within the speaker notes, I want you to do exactly what we did in our last activity. I want you to explain your evidence, because on Monday, you and your group are going to be presenting this to the class, and I'll be grading you on your presentations. So there's the directions. I know that you can read. You can reread them if you need it. Here's my example slide. So you can see, I said that one of the major changes of the industrialization is the ownership of the means of production. Right? In manorialism, farmers owned their own tools. They may rent the land. They may work common land that is technically owned by the noble, but all of their tools, all of the things that they're using, that is all owned by them. Cottage system, women own those looms. However, in industrialization, workers don't own the means of production. Factory owners do. People don't work at home. People go to somebody else's building to work. And they then do work by their time, not by their skill or ability or the tools that they have or whenever they want. They are under the control of a new factory owner. And then, I actually don't remember what my next piece of evidence is. Which then also leads to new factory rules. Factory owners had to figure out how to teach this population how to work in their factories. Because again, farmers were very used to being their own bosses. Now they're working for somebody else. I mean, things that seem very simple. Are you ready for this? This is actually a factory rule. They had to tell the workers not to go to the bathroom on the factory floor. You cannot go to the bathroom on the factory floor. You have to go use a toilet. Farmers were used to just being able to go wherever they want. Interesting. Another change, a developing middle class. Right? We see now, because of industrialization, no longer the aristocracy being the dominant. We now see this middle class of factory and business owners, these entrepreneurs, who are going to be the dominant class within European society. And this is not only going to impact the way that they dress, because the suit and tie and top hat with a cane and high-heeled shoes is going to be the bourgeois elite. You got it, Quinn. You got it, Brian. The bourgeois elite uniform. But it's also going to impact the family, as the role of women becomes increasingly constrained to the home. Another continuity, though, is work is still hard, especially for the working classes. I mean, laborers were working grueling hours, possibly 13 to 16-hour days, 6 to 7 days a week, usually about 6 days a week. You did not have all the same holidays that you used to have. Work was labor intensive. People's bodies were literally falling apart because of the work that they were doing. The average age of somebody to survive in a city was the age of 18, which doesn't mean there weren't people past. It just means that a lot of people were dying when they were working. In addition, physical labor, not just for adults, but also for children. On the farms and in the cottage system, children were working with their families. They would have household chores and chores on the farm to complete. And after industrialization, children are working in factories. They're working with machines. Their little hands could reach into things that adult hands could not. They were used in mines. You can actually see it here, to open and close doors, sitting by themselves, all in the dark, a mile underground. And so child labor and physical labor is something that is a continuity. So this is an example of what you are doing today in class. You are working with your group to research some of the changes, depending on whichever section your group has been assigned. You're going to read through and highlight the section. You're going to label and describe on your slide 2 changes and 1 continuity. And for each of those, you're going to find a couple of images on Google. Now, what I didn't model for you, but what I modeled through my verbal explanation, is in your speaker notes, you are then going to explain how your piece of evidence proves that there is a change or a continuity. So that's all. You should be pretty close to being done. I'm thinking I will give you about 10 minutes at the beginning of class on Monday to get ready for your presentations, and then we're going to get going. So again, in class today, you are working on finishing this assignment, the Atlantic Revolutions, How Much Did They Change Society, explaining those pieces of evidence, providing an analysis. That should take you no more than 20 minutes. After those 15 to 20 minutes, you're then working with your group to complete the Industrialization in Europe Major Changes slide deck that you're going to be that we just reviewed. Of course, if you have any questions, I'll check my email periodically as I can. Please feel free to send me an email. And of course, I'll be looking to see if the sub has any questions as well. Hope you have a great weekend. Stay safe. You will have the second half of Chapter 17 and the second half of Chapter 18 to read over the weekend. I will be posting that assignment later today. Have a great day.